This Women's Agenda podcast is powered by Eagle Ways Radio, the voice of small business. Hello and welcome to the Women's Agenda podcast. I am here in the studio with our contributing editor, Georgie Dent, and our special guest today is Jane Caro. How are you, Georgie? I will start with you. How are you?
Very well, thank you, and excited to be here with Jane.
And we've got some new music, so this is very exciting that we are experimenting with. My hand is on the dial as I fade that out. So, Jane, I'm pretty sure our audience will need no introduction to you, but a few things: author, novelist, columnist, broadcaster, documentary maker, professional speaker, and social commentator. And
shit stirrer, don't forget that.
Absolute shit stirrer, and we love you for it. And Jane began her career in the advertising industry as an advertising copywriter in 1980, which would have been a very interesting time to be working. I mean, it's probably still an interesting time to be an advertising copywriter now, but I imagine definitely in the early 80s. We've spoken about that previously. And you worked in ad agencies until 2005. So we've got you in the studio today because you've got a new book. So this must be your 10th or something?
I think if you include the ones I've edited, it's about the 12th.
Wow, okay. And across fiction and non-fiction, which is very impressive. And you've done all this since 2005. All your books have been...
Yes, they have. I think the first one was published in 2007.
Wow, okay. So the book is called Accidental Feminist and it explores the generation of women who have changed the world. So it's a generation of women born in the 1950s and 60s and this real first generation where women worked for wages for most of their lives. And we'll go into more about what that means in a second. But Jane, I think we do need to ask you about your political aspirations, as you've been asked many times before. I mean, you did indicate that maybe you might be interested in running for the seat of Warringah a few months back, and you've since confirmed that you won't actually do that. But I'd love to hear what was your decision-making process? Why did you want to get involved? Why did you think you might want to get involved at that point?
Well, I suppose I was very influenced by the election of Trump and the defeat of Hillary Clinton and the call that went out really across the world that we need more women in politics. We need to get these old-style patriarchs, dinosaurs, climate change deniers, misogynists, white supremacists out. And I sort of thought, well, that's true. You know, here I am, I'm sniped from the sidelines, but what do I actually do that's practical? I have... now I've got two grandchildren who are nearly 3 and nearly 1, and every time I look at them, I feel terrible. I just think, what kind of a world are you going to have to cope with? What kind of climate are you going to find yourself living in? Literally, not metaphorically, literally. And so, you know, it was buzzing around in my head, and then my bloody sister mischievously got on Twitter on a Saturday night. She'd probably had a couple of glasses of wine. I'd probably had a couple of glasses of wine. And she said, you know, well, Jane, why don't you do it? Move to Warringah? And I just went back and said, I don't have to move to Warringah. I grew up there. I went to school there. My kids went to Mossman High, you know, and I live just across the border, you know. And I said, if anyone's interested, give me a call. I didn't really kind of do it very seriously. It was more of a joke. Well, then it just went completely feral. It went off.
We should mention the timing of this. So it was just after Karen Phelps.
Yeah, just after Wentworth.
So within sort of hours of her victory speech.
Within hours of her victory speech. And so, everyone had a head of steam up about that. And it just went off. And actually, funnily enough, instead of encouraging me, that kind of put me off. Because I'm very wary about the tendency for us to put people on pedestals. And I think also, in a way, Hillary Clinton's a bit of a lesson about that as well, that we have this really kind of dramatic saint or sinner view of women. So you're either the saviour come to save the world, or the minute you show that you're remotely human and can, you know, make mistakes and not be absolutely sure of absolutely everything absolutely all the time, you're useless, hopeless, a failure. You know, there's no place to be an ordinary human being when you're a woman, and people start to load you with these expectations. So in fact, although it was very generous of people to say, oh, we love you, you've got to run, actually I started to think, oh God, no. I felt like, this is an old school reference, and if you're young you probably won't get it, but I felt like the cat in the Pepe Le Pew cartoons. You know, he's always trying to kiss her and she's always trying to run away. And I started to think, no, I'm not ready for this kind of sanctification. And I like what I do. I like writing. I like doing the kinds of things, and I like being free to say what I think. And I suspect that even as an independent in Parliament, should you get there, you're not as free to say what you think as you are on the outside. So there was a lot of things going on. Quite a few people who know me said, you don't want to do this. It'll, you're more effective outside. So that influenced my thinking. But nevertheless, I also had a feeling of, but maybe it's your duty. Maybe you don't really want to, but it's your duty to do this thing. So I followed it up and I talked to the community groups in Warringah. And it turned out that there was already somebody else that they were talking to. And now they haven't actually ended up being the candidate, but nevertheless, this person was much further along the line than I was, moving their family into the area, doing all sorts of things. And the last thing I wanted to do was cut someone else off at the knees and barge in as the kind of celebrity candidate. Not that I consider myself a celebrity, but you know what I mean. And so I talked to them and I basically said to them, look, I think this candidate's excellent. I'd be very happy to support them. You're already a long way along the line with them. You don't need me. And frankly, I don't have a fire in the belly to do it. And that's important. And so we agreed that I would instead be supportive of the other candidate. Now, that's since changed. Someone else is, Zali Steggles is announced as a candidate. Susan Moylan-Coombs is announced as a candidate. And I think they both have the support of the community groups. And I'm happy to be involved in terms of being supportive of getting Tony Abbott out of Parliament. I don't have any personal animosity towards Tony Abbott. I used to debate him quite regularly and I always found him personable and he always played the issue, not me, which I appreciated. You debated
him in what sort of format?
We used to be on Richard Glover's political forum all the time. In fact, for a while it was me, Bill Shorten, who was then still head of the union that he was head of, I can't remember which one it was, and Tony Abbott, who was at that time opposition spokesperson on health or something like that. So it's a long time ago. And I remember I joked with them both once, we should take this on the road. It seems that they had other ideas.
Quite different ambitions,
yeah, it
perhaps.
Seems like I may, if, the polls continue the way they are, have been debating regularly to prime ministers in making. So I have no personal animosity to Tony Abbott at all, but I am very exercised about climate change, and I have to say I agree with all those people, including Get Up, who are simply saying it's not personal, but we have to get the climate change deniers out of Parliament, out of positions of power. They are stopping us from moving forward, and I think that's absolutely right.
Your views on climate change, where has that sort of stemmed from? I mean, because you mentioned your grandchildren at the top of this conversation. So what's really spurred you on there? Is there something that's changed for you in the past few years or something that's made you go? Because I think there's a few of us who are like that, where I know I certainly am, where I look at my own children and I just think, I have to be able to tell them later on that I contributed in some way to trying to bring this debate forward. I don't even know why it's a debate anymore, but trying to bring some of the solutions forward.
Exactly. I've been exercised about climate change for some time. My brother-in-law is a biologist and a water scientist, and so I've been aware of the science of climate change just from discussions with him and that kind of thing for, I'd say, 3 or 4 decades. But for a long time I thought, we'll see sense, apparently not. Apparently not. I have for a long time hoped that we're not going to turn out to be like all those lost civilisations. Easter Islanders are the ones I always think of that, existed on burning wood, and then they eventually cut down every tree and sort of went, there's no trees left. Yeah, I hope we're not Easter Islanders, but I'm starting to get not just concerned, but kind of panicky about it. And I think that's why there's a head of steam up amongst a lot of people. Particularly I'm noticing older women, and perhaps it is their grandchildren that are really concentrating their mind. I mean, I have this feeling that, my grandparents passed to me a planet in pretty good order. I'm going to be passing to my grandchildren a planet in a much worse state than the one I got. And that's a failure.
Yep, absolutely. So that kind of leads us, I think, into a good conversation about your book as well. So first up, I thought maybe you could I could give my own definition based on reading through your book, but talk us through what you mean by the accidental feminist. And I think it came from a column that you may have written for the ABC or the Guardian or something at some point. Or
the book did. The idea for the book did. The title was argued over long and hard, as titles of books often are. But the book came out of a column I wrote for ABC Online, which was called Women Over 50, A Tale of Two Fates, which was looking at how we are the first generation of women who have mostly earned our own money for most of our lives, and how for some women that's worked out really well. We've had much more varied and interesting and, different lives than really any generation of women before us. And, we're continuing to do that into our older age. But for far too many women of my generation, they've ended up, we're fastest growing group among the homeless, the women over 55. Women retire with half the average amount of super as men, and fully 1/3 of women retire with no super at all. So for some women, it's been a unmitigated disaster how it's played out. So that's where the idea of Louise Adler, God bless her, rang me and said, I've read your column, it's a book, I want you to write it for me. And so I did. The title comes out of the idea that my generation of women didn't set out to change the world. They expected to live the kind of life that their mothers had lived. They expected that what they would do is they would go to school, they would leave school, they'd work for a while, they'd meet a spunk, as one of my interviewees put it, and as we called all good-looking guys when I was young, meet a spunk, get married, have children, happily ever after. That was the idea. Now, that's the idea women have had for generations, that that's what their lives would look like. But actually that's not what happened. And it didn't happen because in 1960, of course, the pill was first offered on to ordinary women, and it allowed women to start to make choices that they'd never be able to make effectively before. Yes, there'd been contraception prior, but it hadn't been anywhere near as efficient. And they were able to start to decide to space their children, not have children. They could have sex and not have children. There was all that sort of thing that started to happen. I also think the tampon is very neglected in its importance in terms of liberating women to feel that they can go out in the world and not have to dread the embarrassment of either smelling or leaking or all those things. Why they should be embarrassing is another conversation we're starting to have, which is really good, but they certainly were in the 1960s and 70s. And also then women started to get a paycheck, and that gave them an independence that they hadn't had before. And so my generation and second wave feminism hit when I was in high school. And so our teachers, many of our mothers, not nearly enough, but many of our mothers, our older sisters, started to rebel against the narrow little lives that women were supposed to be satisfied with. And we were very influenced. And I remember our teachers saying to us, go to university, and free university education hit as well. So suddenly girls could go to university in almost as many numbers as boys. And indeed, I think in 1960-something it was about 100 and something boys to 60-something girls who went to university. By 1987, completely flipped. And now there are vastly more women going to university than there are men. So everything sort of snowballed around about the end of the 60s, the beginning of the 70s, which, of course, for women of my age was absolutely when we were growing up and forming our ideas about what kind of life we might lead. And so it was technology, as it always is, that drives change, but also demography, because we're the baby boomers, so there were an awful lot of us. So, and suddenly business could see that there were all these highly educated women out there, and they were a resource that were not being used properly. So we started to go into the workplace. Business, in theory, liked the idea, but the way workplaces were didn't make you feel like they did.
So when you say businesses liked the idea, because we get that obviously today still, that businesses really like the idea, but often in theory there's a few things going on that suggest that maybe they don't like the idea enough to change the status quo. But what kind of things were they doing to support women at that time? What were they doing to try and encourage or employ women in?
Not a lot, but there was a sort of sense in which it was no longer well, they did things like the second wave feminists did things like get rid of in newspapers where they had jobs for men and boys and jobs for women and girls. So job ads were gender segregated when I was young, and they got rid of that. So suddenly all jobs had to be advertised to anyone. Well, that sounds like a small thing, but actually it's a really big thing. And so women started applying for non-traditional jobs. And, of course, if you're getting more women with university educations, and when free university came in, it wasn't just young women straight out of high school like me that got a chance to go to university, but it was older women who'd been denied the chance previously who grabbed that opportunity and filled the ranks of the universities. Christopher Pine used to go on and say, it was privileged people who took advantage of the free university education. By people, he meant women. And that was because they'd been denied it, often by their fathers. When they were younger, when there was a choice between sending the boy to uni or the girl, the boy went in those days. So they raced into universities, and then they started to get jobs. So basically there was this tidal wave, I think, of women applying for jobs they hadn't previously applied for, and a lot of publicity, but their resistance was strong. The fight over the first woman pilot for Ansett went on for years and had to go into the courts. They were so resistant to the idea. So the thing that people forget is you get what you resist. So the more that the male world, and I'm using a generalisation, not all men, of course, hashtag not all men, but the predominantly
hashtag eye roll.
Yeah, hashtag eye roll. But the predominantly male world previously resisted hard. Whilst they might say, oh, yes, it's very nice to see the girls coming into work, they resisted in fact. But that just drove women on, because the more someone resists you, the more you get shitty and the more you push. And that's basically what happened. But even so, when we went into the workplace, there were still people saying things, well, if you want to go to uni or you want to go to work, well, I guess that's all right, just so long as my dinner's on the table every night at 6 o'clock, So you still got to do all the stuff you did before. And if you want to do this work thing, that's your business.
Your 30 hours of housework on the side, domestic duties, caring duties, they don't actually disappear.
No.
You don't have anyone to look after.
Don't disrupt my life.
Yeah.
Jane, on that note, I was interested when you were saying before that, previously the expectation was that women would simply finish school, maybe do a little bit of work until they met their spunk, settled down, had kids, and that would be happily ever after. And as you said, that has very evidently not worked out terrifically well for a great number of people.
It didn't work out ever really all that well.
And yet it's still, I think there is still that belief, and not just for men. I actually think there's a lot of women who believe that too, that would be the ideal outcome for life. Why is that? Why is that still a sort of such an attractive notion to so many people when it is proven to be disastrous in so many cases?
Well, we all have the fantasy that someone's going to love us forever. I think that's a human desire. And particularly when we're young, I think young women have a spurious kind of power. You're most attractive to the opposite sex between the ages of 15 and 25. And at that age, you feel quite powerful, because if little guys want you, they're fluttering around you, you can feel like, what's this feminism shit about? I'm having a ball. The trouble is that once you marry and then you start to have children, it's my observation, and I'm nearly 62, so I've been watching this space for a long time, that it is in fact marriage, and particularly motherhood, if you have children, that actually drops those romantic scales from women's eyes. You suddenly realise, oh, no. This isn't going to be a romantic idol. This is me as drudge. This is me as cleaning up shit. This is me scrubbing the toilet bowl. And the thing is, it's still women, a lot of women have a vested interest in pretending it is a romantic ideal. When I was young, my mother was radically different from other mothers. The first thing was she was a feminist and a member of WELL. That was really unusual. The second thing was she said, always told us, don't do what I did, get an education, get a decent job, have your own money, be independent, you can make your own choices. Very unusual message back then. I cannot emphasise enough how unusual that was and how important that was. She tells a wonderful story about how in the 1960s she was out at a dinner, and my father was quite a successful businessman, so they'd go to these big corporate dinners. And she said this, bloke was waxing lyrical. Somehow they got onto feminism and women's lib, as it was called then. And this guy was saying, well, I don't think women are equal. I think they're superior. I think they're, ethereal, marvellous, it's fabulous, should be protected. They're nicer than us. They're, blah, blah, that.
Sounds like a John Howard comment.
Yeah,
I think
that
you made
sort of era.
Yeah.
And my mother sat there quietly, and she was always deceptively quite demure. And she suddenly, when there was a pause in the conversation, she said, well, if we're so superior and so ethereal and so special and so in need of being, looked up to and carefully nurtured, why is it always me that gets down on my knees and scrubs the toilet? It's a deathly hush at the corporate dinner table. Because, of course, her question was unanswerable, and every woman there got on their knees and scrubbed the toilet, and absolutely none of the men did. And I think as women got more honest about what their lives were like, by listening to other women who had the courage to be honest about what their lives were like, the great lie about the bliss of motherhood started to crack and collapse. And that's, I think, when the big changes happened. But the workplace didn't make it easy. It didn't want you to have children. There was basically a time where women were told either or. And there used to be magazine headlines endlessly saying, can women have it all? And by have it all, what they meant was meaningful paid work and a family, which after all is what men expected as just a base. That wasn't all. That was just a base. You assume you get that. But for women, greedy women, they want what men have.
And the reality is it actually is still difficult to do that because of a number of structural problems, but also attitudinal problems that that still persist.
Well, we still... there's a quote in the book, this lovely blog I came across from America with a teacher. He writes a blog about teaching in America. Obviously, I'm interested in that for all sorts of reasons. But he wrote this particular post where he said that he had finally understood the female code of honour by working in the feminised profession of teaching. And he said the female code of honour is that they are judged, and they judge themselves on their nurturing, so that it's all about caring, that women have to be just caring up the wazoo. Fortunately, I've never been infected with that, but a lot of women are. And that it's kind of like you've got to prove that you will go to the ends of the earth. He used the example of, if an American teacher needs a whiteboard, she won't go to the school system and say, I need a whiteboard. She'll scrimp and save, she'll fundraise, she'll bake cookies, she'll do, to get the whiteboard to help her kids in the classroom. He said as a male teacher, he just goes and asks for the whiteboard. He said the reason that women in America, and therefore the teaching profession in America, because like here it's mostly women, are marching in the streets for the first time ever, he says it's the Me Too movement. He said Me Too's having this ripple effect where women are going, holy shit, we're being taken advantage of. Our attempts to please people by looking after them, by placating, by being sweet, by keeping the peace, blessed are the peacemakers, all that crap. We're just being exploited. What are we doing? And the final blow to the female code of honour, I think, was when the American president asked teachers to take a bullet for their students rather than take on the NRA. That's a bridge too far for most nurturers. But I think we're all infected with this idea that we must give and give and give and give.
I think you can be infected with if you have a male partner and a father in your children's lives, you can often feel like any assumptions that are made about your kids or your parenting style all comes down to you, or any assumptions made about the state of your house or whatever's going on about what's going on domestically all comes down to you, and that if it's messy or unkept or if it's disorganised, then surely it's a reflection on you. And I don't know if, that might be something that we internalise, or I internalise myself, but it could also... I do feel like those judgments are made, and
they are.
Also, there's a thing about the emotional labour, which I know that you had this great line in your book where you talked about. I think your colleague came up and said, "I want to come up with a prize for a consumer competition that we're running, and it's targeted at mothers." And your thought was, well, I need. You called them a producer, I guess, like an assistant or somebody.
Well, a producer in advertising is a particular thing where they do all the minutiae work for you. So when you're off shooting a commercial and you're the creative person, so important, the producer makes sure the cab charges are there, makes sure the taxi's ordered, makes sure that you're in the right place at the right time, makes sure there's restaurant for you to go to or food available, or that you're warm enough, or you've got somewhere to sit, or, you know, they just run around and make... So they're like your mum. And I suddenly realised how fabulous this was. And then I realised why I was enjoying it so much. It was because when I went home, I had 2 small children at the time and my husband travelled a lot. When I went home, it would be me that became the producer for everyone else's life. And so what we don't recognise, and we don't calculate it into the 30 hours of housework a week, is the constant emotional labour that women are doing all the time, because the pressure is not only on us to have a spotless house, you're absolutely right, to cook fabulous meals that everyone eats joyfully, but it's also on us to have a happy family, a happy marriage. And if we feel that we're not living up to that idea of the happy family, we feel it's our fault. We've failed. That's our job. These messages have been sent to women for thousands of years. If we think we're going to overcome them in a few short decades, we're crazy. But it's like any other prejudice. It's the same as we're all, to some extent, racist. Of course we are. Not one of us is free of racist assumptions, particularly if we're white. But you work against it. You might get the visceral reaction to a woman in the full burqa and think, oh my God, that seems so alien and different. But you say to yourself, yes, but there's a person under that, you know, and you don't know anything about her and you shouldn't be making assumptions. You have to consciously work against it. Well, it's the same thing with women having to consciously say to themselves, yes, people will judge you. I mean, you're absolutely right. I always thought, you know, if someone comes over to our house and it looks like a bomb's gone off in it, no one ever thinks, well, that Ralph's a bad housekeeper. Never, ever. Mind you, he does do most of the housework now, so they ought to. But they don't. It's still, on some level, my responsibility. Fortunately, as you get older, you do get better at caring so much about the way people judge you. I also think it might be part of the insecurity you have as a mother bringing up children, because you are trying very hard to bring up good people. I have to tell you, you'll just bring up people. They'll be a bit good and a bit bad, and sometimes they'll shit you and, you know, all that. That's the way it goes. But once you're past all of that and your children are your children and they're either good or shit or a mixture of both most likely, you give up a lot of that sense of, I've got to be trying really hard because what if one of my children ends up on drugs or in jail or something.
Or running a terrorist organisation, which is what I'm currently really concerned about with my middle child.
Right. But no one will blame their father. That's the weird thing. They won't blame their father, particularly if you're a working mother.
Well, my children are doomed, doomed from the start. But I think I think what you said about the Me Too movement is actually very interesting here, because I think in terms of working against these sort of ingrained cultural expectations of women, I think the more women speak to each other and speak openly about these challenges, I think it does become easier to unpick it. I mean, I wrote a piece earlier this year basically saying that I don't do New Year's resolutions, but really, honestly, the one thing I want to do this year is lower the bar, because I know that I make my life more difficult. I don't set out to make my life more difficult, but I know that at the end of the day, when I actually stop and process the different things that I'm trying to achieve, it's ridiculous, and that does not make me happy. It doesn't. I can't live up to this expectation I have of myself as a parent, as a worker, as every category of my life. And I think that
I think there's honest conversations about that, and we see that, and there's been great communities built through social media, and I think you've written about this previously, Jane, about especially around Twitter and how that's empowered a lot of people. But then there could also be the other side of that, and I think particularly through Instagram or something else, where at the same time as people are trying to show that they've lowered the bar, you might have other people saying how they've hired the bar, and it just feels this constant sort of trying to, this race for where am I supposed to be here? What is kind of normal and acceptable and okay. And we have messages coming at all points now. So I love what you say about Me Too, because some people can look at Me Too and say, that was a lot of rhetoric and, a few Hollywood producers went and that happened. But I like to take that example of it, just shows how women have found power in other ways. And it's not necessarily about talking about sexual harassment or violence or assault in their own workplaces or that they've experienced elsewhere, but it can also be about just stepping into your power a little bit and saying, hey, this is a moment and we are ready to come together to speak out and actually get what we deserve, what we've deserved all along.
I think that's right.
I agree. And I actually think that the power of Me Too is actually symbolic, I think, because, and we've written about this and spoken about it, but I know that it was not that long ago, even 2 years ago, the idea of sexual harassment in workplaces being a modern issue was dismissed. A lot of people went to the line of, well, that doesn't happen anymore, that was Mad Men. And I think what Me Too has shown is that the reality is that it's very different. The magnitude was unknown. And I think in recognising that, it thinks, well, what else are we being told that is not actually happening and that's actually vastly different? And I think there's power in that, in the people actually recognising what we've been told is a lie.
Also, I don't think it's a coincidence that just as women went into the workplace for the first time, just as they said. The thing to remember too is that women have outperformed men in education for over 100 years, virtually since they were allowed to go to school. They have done better at school. So women have been leaning in for a really long time. And they've had merit for a really long time. Nobody recognised it. But the thing to remember is once they went into the workplace, particularly after the peel, after second wave feminism, into the workplace in great numbers, the bar for everything else ratcheted it up really high. It was like we could only earn our right to go into the workplace, not by just doing the bloody work, which is all men had to do, but we had to earn our right by being perfect mothers, perfect homekeepers, slim, sexy, gourmet cooks. It was at that point that the bar... My mother was lazy as anything. She was at home all the time. The house was always a mess. She read books and newspapers and said to us in the morning, I'll go off and play and don't come home till dinner. That's what all my generation's mothers did. They didn't feel they had to prove their right to exist by having a spotless house. Some of them did because they liked it. Some of them didn't. Yes, they got judged for it, but they didn't seem to care as much. But it's almost as if women, because we have this thing where we still feel we have to earn our right to exist. Men just have a right to exist. Women feel we have to earn our right to exist by being of use to others. And we kind of bought.
And God forbid you put money or something else ahead.
Oh, yes.
Or your financial security or your financial future ahead of...
Gold digger, calculating. It's all about love for us.
I mean, what does anyone need money for?
No,
I mean,
God will give it to you.
Everyone's got their happily ever after.
Well, exactly. I mean, you marry the right man and you'll have no money trouble.
Yeah, until he trades you in for a younger model. And gets his lawyers onto you. It was always a crock of shit, but I don't think it's a coincidence that the bar went up just at that point. And we are now, I think, getting to a point in our evolution as whole human beings rather than a kind of permanent servant gender of saying, actually sort this. Why do I have to live up to all these expectations from other people? And in a way, that's what Me Too weirdly has done, because I think women felt, as people who are victimised in some way often do, there's enormous shame. I mean, I edited that book, Unbreakable, which is about the shame, came out just before Me Too, which is about the shame attached to being victimised by someone, that almost inexplicably people who are victimised feel shame about it. And so I think that because you feel you must have done something, or you must have looked a certain way, or you didn't react in the right way when it happened, and people like to tell you that as well. But I think women are starting to really draw a boundary. I think men and women have had boundary issues for quite a long time. Women didn't have enough boundaries. Men's boundaries were very, very thick. We're now saying to men, you need to loosen up your boundaries a bit. And we're saying to women, you need to thicken yours because you didn't have enough. And we took the blame for everything. We were responsible for what happened to us and what happened to absolutely everybody. My theory is that patriarchal religion basically made women over-responsible and men under-responsible. And what we actually need to do is make everybody understand that what they are responsible for and what the other person is responsible for, which is essentially yourself. And then you can actually go through life as two individuals rather than some sort of unhealthy, enmeshed, boundaryless gloop.
Okay, so that's one thing that could change. Do you think it could actually change? Are you optimistic that we're at that point where that could change? Yes. So I'd love to ask you, just as we start to wrap up, about particularly going back to this idea of women's financial security. And when we're looking at women aged over 55, I think the stat is now being the fastest cohort of homelessness in Australia.
The fastest growing cohort.
Sorry. What needs to change? Because this is a situation that we've got now. It's happening right now. So what can be done to protect some of these women and also protect some of the women who will be in that point in the next few years or the next decade or whenever it is?
A frightening number of women who are approaching that and really suddenly starting to realize. I've talked to a journalist this morning who said, I was reading your book and I was totally confronted because I suddenly realised I'm 52, I'm divorced, I've got 3 kids, I don't have any, what happens? And I said, well, you need to go see a financial planner, like now. And that's the thing. This is confronting in that it basically says to women, no one's going to come and rescue you financially. So we have to do some proactive stuff. But we also have to recognise it's not our fault, because when you look at, and I hope I unpack it pretty clearly, how the system is set up to make us end our lives dependent. It's really set up to make us dependent continuously and then blame us for that, which is a really neat equation. But I think there are some things we can do straight away. Some of them are starting to happen, interestingly enough, in companies which have female CEOs.
Yep.
HCF is one of the first examples.
Energy Australia.
Energy Australia is another one, but HCF did a really interesting thing, which I think could be a model, where they said that they would continue to pay the unpaid part of all their employees' parental leave superannuation for the up to 52 weeks. So, because the problem is you get your 18 weeks paid and then there's nothing, and your super is just standing still. I actually think that anyone who takes time out for caring responsibilities, whether it's of small children, whether it's of elderly people, whether it's of someone with a disability who needs care, that every person who does that should have their super paid by the government for the entire time that they are doing it, because they are saving the whole community and the taxpayer an enormous amount of money by doing that unpaid work. And then we ask them to take a double hit. Not only do you lose your income, but you lose your own security in your own old age because you took time out to care for people. That is unconscionable. That is just wrong on every level. So that's something we could immediately do.
Yeah, because just on that, I look at that because we are starting to see a lot more of those big employers making those announcements, which is great. You see it particularly in very competitive environments where they're really struggling to find enough to find the talent, and they really want to show how they're supporting female talent. I start to worry then if it creates a bit of a divide in the sense that...
It can't be like American healthcare where you only get it if you're lucky enough to be in a decent employment.
Yeah, exactly.
See, I already think that because, as we know, it is rare in Australia for people to have an extended period of paid parental leave at their actual wage. We know there's 18 weeks of the minimum wage through the government.
And I also have always thought that parental leave should be paid in the same way as super, in the same way as sick pay, in the same way as holiday pay, as a percentage of your salary. It should be a workplace entitlement, not a welfare entitlement, because as long as we look at it as a welfare entitlement, we're still seeing allowing women to work as a kind of favour to them. Their economic contribution is not being taken seriously.
But then there's also, if you look at it, the organisations that do have the best policies are the big, large corporations, investment banks, big,
law firms,
top listed,
blah, blah, blah.
And those are the women who get the decent stretch of paid parental leave are already in the high earning position. And so again, I think there is this sort of dual system going on and particularly as we know a lot of women are actually leaving the workforce altogether. They're starting businesses, they're working freelance, and in that situation, you have none of the security that comes with working for a big company.
Yeah, so we have this progress going on, but then we also have the casualised workforce.
Women are dealing with all the difficulties men are, and then another layer. And so I absolutely agree. That's why I say it should be a government payment to anyone who takes time out to care for others, unpaid caring. Their super should be continually paid, because it'll cost us a lot less in the long run. We've got this really weird situation where we've got suddenly a whole cohort of older women who've got quite a lot of money because they've earned it, and it's their money. They're not spending the housekeeping, they're not spending the inheritance, they're spending their own money, and that's why writers' festivals are going off. That's why, all those things, book clubs, all Pilates, it's all older women. Hey, it's why why Tony's in trouble in Warringah. You should see who stacks those meetings, older women. It's all older women, and they're the ones with time and money, and that's great, and a sense of confidence that probably a generation of older women has never quite had in the same way. And that's fantastic. And marketers are eyeing that cohort with, rubbing their hands together with glee. And becoming a market is a form of power. We've always been invisible before. But the legislators are eyeing the cohort of women who are living precarious existence, really frightened about whether they can keep a roof over their heads, very little discretionary income, surviving in misery on New Start, which is outrageous. Last year when Anglicare did their snapshot of affordable rental accommodation right across Australia for people who are living on New Start, 3 houses in the whole of Australia were affordable if you're living on New Start. And women over 50 can't get jobs. So we're asking them to do a work plan because, according to Tim Wilson, New Start is a trampoline. It's not a hammock. Well, not if you're a woman over 55. You can't get another bloody job. It's almost impossible. So we pay them nothing. They're living out of the car on the kindness of strangers, and then we rub their nose in it week after week by making them apply for jobs that they can never get. Thanks, Mum. Thanks, Grandma. Thanks, all those women who sacrifice themselves to look after us. Here's your reward. We're going to slap you upside of the head every week. It is a shocker.
Absolutely, yep. It's come up. We're doing a survey on women's ambitions at the moment, and that came up in our 27 survey. It's come up again in our 2019 survey of women in that age group, but also a little bit younger as well. But some of these women they've gone and got another degree, or they've gone and got extra qualifications, or they've done some sort of experience or internships or things like that to try and set themselves up for being a part of the job market after taking 15, 20 years out or so. And they're coming up against ageism.
Yes.
And they're actually, it's some of the
Ageism
comments
is huge.
are that I'm ready to give, a few decades of my life to the workforce now. I want to go in. I've got the experience. I'm ready to go full slog at this. I haven't been able to the last, 15, 20 years. Now is my time. And they're still, and you just think, what a valuable, wonderful resource. And so many employers are missing out on that because they're cutting them out at the first.
Well, they're ageist, and they're deliberately ageist, and sometimes they'll say it to their face because it's still a discrimination that you can actually say. I often wonder, when is the right time to be a woman? When you're first going out into the workforce, everyone thinks, well, how are you going to get married? Are you going to have children? So that's the wrong age to be a woman. Then you have children, so you're looking after them, so you're part-time, whatever. That's the wrong age to be a woman. So then you skill up and you get ready to come back in and you're, mid-40s, early. Oh, you're too old. Holy shit, when was that moment? When was that minute when I was the right age?
There was
1 minute in there.
There was about 6 months, and it was really sad that you didn't use that time
didn't get that
to earn all
6
your
months.
money. Just 6 months.
All right, well, we do need to wrap up. Thank you so much, Jane, for coming in. Thank you,
Pleasure.
Georgie, for being with us as always.
Pleasure.
It's a fantastic book. It's released in February. It's not
Yeah,
actually in bookshops.
It comes out next week.
Next week. Okay, Accidental Feminist.
A good read.
All right. Thank you. Well, thank you for listening, and a reminder that we do publish every day just before lunchtime. You can subscribe to our free newsletter at womensagenda.com.au/subscribe. And we'll be back next week. This is our first podcast for 2019. We're planning on doing a lot more. We're planning on really doing ones that try to wrap up what's going on in the news each week as well. So you'll be hearing more from us. Thank you.